All right, again, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining. This is the session titled How Data Quality Defines Your Organization. I hope you can see that on my screen right now. My name is Peter Mirus, and today I'll be introducing a simple framework for understanding data quality that you can use to drive data quality conversations at your organization, hopefully leading to improvements in the quality of your data as well as greater mission impact, because that's what we're all about. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started here. Uh, Please ask your questions or provide comments as you like via the Good Tech Fest Slack channel, How Data Quality Defines Your Organization. It's kind of tricky to track Q&A and chat and all that in multiple different locations at once. So I think I've disabled the chat feature for Zoom so that we can try to push everything into the channel. And so anytime you'd like to post there, and I'll actually ask you to post something specific there in just a moment, that would be great. I know we're not all in person today, unfortunately. It would be great to be with you in the same room, but please avoid multitasking because you might just miss the best part. And again, this session is being recorded like all of the sessions, and links to recordings will be available for registrants after the fact. I'm not exactly sure what the lag time is on that. But if you miss this or have to jump out for some reason, just know that you'll be available to pick it up where you left off. As I said, my name is Peter Mirus. I'm a founding partner at Build Consulting. Been working with the nonprofit sector or the social good space for over 20 years, serving over 100 clients. I have three primary areas of expertise, and those are information strategy, nonprofit business and operations strategy, and communications. I actually started out my career many, many moons ago in graphic design, and then got into technology and data because I wanted to know how my clients in graphic design were funding information about their mission and success into their campaigns and the images that I was trying to represent for them of their mission success. So I wanted to know how they were coming up with the statistics about their success and what drove those and whether or not they could be doing better. Build Consulting, which is my firm, was founded on this premise. But one of the challenges is that over 50% of nonprofit technology projects fail. And the reason for that is that the technology moves forward, but the organization does not. And we often put this visual in front of our clients. It stands for old organization plus new technology equals expensive old organization. And this is probably no more frequently seen than when an organization has some sort of problems with their data and they want to introduce a new piece of technology, thinking that that will mystically solve all of their data quality issues. And sometimes the technology is at fault, but more often than not, it can be just as much the need for change inside of the organization in understanding and habits in regards to good data quality management. And so that's one of the reasons why we underscore that transformation is critical to our client success when they're adopting new technology. And just to show you how we think about where data is in the sort of a framework for success, when you're thinking about making improvements in data or technology at your organization, it really all comes back to leadership and governance. Do you have the right policy? Do you have the right leadership? Your operational capacity, how the quality of your processes that you're using to manage your programs and collect your data, the structure and integrity of the data itself, which is what we're going to be talking about at a high level today from a data quality perspective. And then the technology. And the technology is intentionally last because you have to get everything right upstream of technology in order for technology to be effective. So here's a quick agenda for our time together today. First, I'd like to get to know you a little bit. Usually when I do these kinds of sessions in person at conferences, I have everybody go around the room and say who they are, what their role is inside of their organization, and what they were hoping to get out of today's conversation. So I can sort of weave that into the course of the information that I'm going to be presenting today. So if you would please take a moment to right now go over into the Slack channel, hopefully you have it up and available, and just introduce yourself real quick for me. Let me know, again, your name, first name is fine, or maybe just your title at your organization would be good, and what you specifically were hoping to get out of this conversation. That would be great. And I do see a few familiar faces among the profile photos today. That's great. I'm not sure if I've run across you at a previous Good Tech Fest or at another nonprofit technology-related conference, but thanks for joining today and good to see you again. And while folks are doing that, I'll just run through the rest of the agenda. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my firm's observations in regards to data quality in the nonprofit sector. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about making the case for data quality, how you build an argument for improved data quality. And then we're going to talk about the dimensions of data quality. The way I look at it, there are 5 dimensions of data quality, and then we're going to talk about some ways that those apply in different types of organizational program settings. And then I'm going to finish with just a few recommendations about how to advance these kinds of conversations inside of your organization. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end. But also, anytime you have a question or would like to interject a comment in the course of this, please just run it by me on the channel, and I'll do my best to try to keep an eye on that as well as what I'm doing at the same time. I'm just going to pause for a moment to take a look at the channel posts. So Annie, Stu, Tom Stewart, I know we've run up against each other before at some point. Good to see you. Mitchell, Tiffany. Yeah, I see a lot of different people, a lot of some vendors, some independent consultants, some program managers. That's great. Data quality analysis workers. That's good. Sweet. Trying to scroll along here. Ariel, hope I'm pronouncing that right. Doug, good to see you. Mark, Alex, great. So a lot of different people from a lot of different types of organizations and different backgrounds. That's great. And yeah, if you have any additional questions or comments about what you're trying to get out of today's session, that would be great. I really appreciate that. So let's move it along here. If I can back up. So my firm works exclusively with nonprofits, and we do a lot of work in broad information strategy or information technology assessments and roadmaps, so multi-year strategies for nonprofit organizations. We do a lot of work in specific software assessments and selections, so your CRM, ERP, program data management, program management, volunteer management, et cetera. And we also provide some implementation support services, helping to guide clients through their implementations. We're completely vendor agnostic and independent. We don't work with any vendors, any formal relationships. And this sort of gives us an opportunity to engage with nonprofits on their side of things and really see what their data quality challenges are. And we do also offer some outsourced data management services. So we work hand in hand with our clients to try to help them with their data quality challenges. So anyways, throughout all of these different kinds of engagement, we've seen organizations encounter and then deal with or fail to deal with different kinds of data quality issues. And the kinds of decisions that they make regarding data quality are interesting to us and to me in 3 different ways. And the first is that data quality decisions have the ability to determine how successful an organization will be. Basically how it sets itself up for success, mediocrity, or failure based on its ability to manage and leverage data to make informed business decisions and drive impact. I think about 5 years ago, I read an article about performance data management and reviewing that data to drive performance improvement in the UK. And the study indicated that about 92% of organizations in that sector collect performance data about their programs, but only 6% use that data in any formal way to evaluate and drive performance improvement. Clearly, we'd like to see many, many more organizations within the social good sectors collect high value data about their programs and really use it to drive impact. The second thing is that data quality decisions are profoundly, I think, revealing of the strengths and limitations of an organization. So does the organization have the strategic vision to make appropriate investments in data quality? Does your organization know what relationships it has with other organizations and individuals, and what data is profoundly important to nurturing and growing those relationships? And as I said before, it all comes back to leadership, and you really learn if the organization has that leadership and the discipline to require staff to adhere to policies, standards, and business processes that result in good data quality. And third, many organizations don't really or fully comprehend the full picture of what data is. And data is all of the information that your organization collects, both qualitative and quantitative, or both structured and unstructured. And another way of putting that in a more simple way is it's about both the narrative and the numbers. And you really need to have both in order to really understand your organization's operations. And as I said before, its program effectiveness and how to use that to drive enhanced mission impact. So let's talk a little bit about making the case for data quality. So this picture that you see on your screen here is an aerial photo of the Washington Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. It was taken in 1985, and I would say superficially it appears like a somewhat prosaic urban landscape. Folks who are local to this area in Washington, D.C., I'm here in Northern Virginia, would be familiar with where this is located. And in 1980, Congress created the Superfund to pay for cleanup of the country's most hazardous waste sites. And in 1998, the EPA put the Washington Navy Yard on the national priorities list, which means that it's one of the 1,700 prioritized cleanup projects of the 47,000 waste sites in the United States. And the Washington Navy Yard site has the status, at least last time I checked, of active, meaning that the cleanup facilities had not yet been completed. And what you see here on your screen now is a picture of the Anacostia River on which the Navy Yard is situated. And it's part of a complex ecosystem, the river, about which much data has been collected and about what there is still much to be learned. In data quality, we talk about sometimes the real world object. And data exists to describe a real world object. And the better the quality of your data, the better you are able to understand the real world object and then your relationship to it, how your actions impact it. And just as the river flows continuously, sometimes the real world object is in a constant state of flux. No more so is this true than when you're collecting data about people. They don't stay in one place, they move around, and their condition changes and their behaviors change and the actions in which they engage change. So this is just to point out that if you have poor quality data, when you're trying to describe something using data that's inherently hard to describe already, you're putting yourself in an even more difficult position. And good quality data has been and continues to be part of the Anacostia watershed cleanup process. And that's seen participation from numerous different organizations, and gathering and integrating high quality data from various sources is critical to the work of these organizations and to other organizations, both large and small, participating in worldwide conservation efforts. So, whether your organization or agency is removing contaminants from the Washington Navy Yard and the Anacostia watershed, or running medical field trials in Africa, or training small businesses in Afghanistan, or empowering women and girls in inner cities in the United States, or combating domestic violence in the United States, the information you gather about the people you serve and their local environment has a good deal to do with the impact of your efforts. So, with so much data lacking in what we wish we could obtain, the quality of the data that we do have to describe those real world objects becomes of paramount importance, because data quality directly helps to create life quality. Data quality is not just about accuracy, as we'll cover in the upcoming parts of the conversation. It's multidimensional. We all need to place the right information in the hands of all people in our organizations, from the C-suite to the frontline staff, to the constituents and the stakeholders that we serve in the community. And that helps create greater efficiency and impact. By doing this, how can we help people to do new and amazing things? That's what it's all about, right? We're hopefully, I like to say, and this is viewed as a little bit extreme by some of my colleagues in the space, but I say that data is about love. Because if we're in the social sector, and ultimately our job is to love the people and things that we are in a relationship with and trying to enhance and preserve as part of our missions. And the data is about describing those relationships and the people and things that we serve or put ourselves in a relationship to, then it should be about love. The mission is about love, and data is about love. And if that's what it's not, if that's not what it's about, then what are we here for? And finally, I would say the data that you have enables you to have a voice, to be heard. You want to get through to people, and the stories that you tell with that data creates resonance on two different fronts. It creates intellectual resonance, and it creates emotional resonance with your key audiences. It communicates the value of your work and helps to secure the funds and influence necessary to do the work well. So if you were going to go into your organization and put together an impassioned pitch for why data quality is important, these are some of the aspects that I would focus on. And used similar stories like this and others that you'll see throughout the course of this presentation to really try to hit those intellectual and emotional resonance points with different executives, decision makers, and others to really put the emphasis on good quality data. So now I'd like to transition and talk about what data quality is. And I often frame it in terms of these 5 dimensions for the sake of simplicity. And those who are familiar with data quality terminology used by some major funders like USAID will probably recognize some points of familiarity in this, although it's not exactly the same. And these dimensions are, first, completeness, validity, and accuracy, which are distinct but well paired with each other. Sorry, I'm having some presentation issues here. Consistency, timeliness, and integrity. And we're going to take each one of these in turn and talk about them. And as I said before, please feel free to post any questions or even comments that you have based on your own experience. So first, we're going to talk about completeness. And the case study that we're going to use here is gender equality. So let's say that your organization is running an economic development program in Afghanistan, as one of my former clients was. And let me tell you, you have to be really mission-driven to deal with the challenges of doing these kinds of projects in places like Afghanistan and Iraq and Lebanon and other challenging environments. And this particular program was focused on training small business owners and entrepreneurs to engage in the global economy. And as an aspect of the data collection, the program managers, and they call them chiefs of party, sort of on the ground program directors, were tasked with collecting information on women served through these programs. This was an imperative coming from both the funder and their own organization. Big focus on engaging with women. And the program is executed through multiple technical assistance projects run out of various locations within the country. And so the data collection was being done on paper and then entered into spreadsheets. However, the data collection method was not standardized in the best way, let's just say. And some projects had a field to capture the beneficiary gender and some did not. Some of the projects had a gender field, but did not consistently manage the paper documents that captured that information, resulting in the loss of backup. That's sometimes backup information, and contributing to data gaps, or at least challenges supporting that the data that was collected was accurate. And the problems within this scenario impacted both the breadth and the depth of the information. The data was not complete, and in order to successfully provide reports based on the data, the program managers had to make best guesses to fill the information in. And this impacted the data quality and obviously also the trustworthiness of the data. And so this is the kind of completeness problem that you want to avoid. And completeness, as I said, is about breadth and depth. It's about the fields of information that you're capturing, as well as there being a value in each record for that field. So if you think about it in terms of a spreadsheet visual, you have the names of the fields going across the top, the records going down vertically. You want to make sure that you have all of the appropriate fields, but you also want to make sure that each one is populated a complete record, in other words. So you want to make sure that the gender field is available as an attribute of the data object you want to describe, and you want to make sure that the field has information in it. And so this is a simple example of the problems that can be created by incomplete data. When a major funder like USAID loses confidence in the data quality and trustworthiness of the data because they see problems, then they lose confidence in your ability to deliver on the program. But on the flip side, having good quality data and backup for that data causes the funder to gain confidence in the program, and it increases the chances that the program will be expanded or renewed. So again, for completeness, you really want to make sure that you have the breadth and depth of completeness that you need. Does the data have all of the expected attributes or fields? And is the data set as fully populated as expected? This completeness is very, very simple and often one of the first things that people think about for data quality. Do we have the data? That's the most basic thing, right? And now I'm going to talk a little bit about validity and accuracy. So in the world of data management, including performance data management for programs, validity is, I would say, defined as the conformity to a domain of values. And that domain of values might be a couple of different things. It might be an actual set of valid values, such as a list of states or provinces. It could be a range of values, such as a number between 1 and 100. Or it could be a rule that would generate a value, such as GPS coordinate fields being automatically populated from a street address. So in other words, validity is judged by comparing data to criterion or constraints. So, in order to test and measure validity, you need to know the value or rules to which the data should be compared. So, these are the rules that prevent invalid data from being entered, and that goes a long way to helping avoid inaccuracy. And you can extend the definition of validity to create rules for preventing or assessing duplicate data, which in sets over a very small size is difficult to assess visually, right? So you want to try to have those system-based rules in place. So for example, you can create a rule for a beneficiary database indicating that it should be impossible to have two records with the same last name and street address. You can be using a piece of invalid data, excuse me, let me start over. You can be using a piece of valid data that is nonetheless inaccurate. So validity and accuracy are related, but they're not the same thing. In order to examine accuracy, you must examine the real world object and compare it to the data. So for example, if I was filling in a state field and entered MD for Maryland, that would be considered a valid response because it conforms to that list of states, that domain of values. But if I entered Maryland and I lived in Virginia, the data would be valid by the standard that we designated, but not accurate. And so you can assess validity, as I said, sometimes automatically, preferably in a consistent rule-based way. But in order to really assess accuracy, you do need to actually compare the data to the real world thing that it's describing. And sometimes that can be more easily said than done. So let's tie this to a use case. So last week, this man was a 10,000 per year donor to your organization. But this week, he's no longer your donor. Why? Well, this man's wife was on your mailing list, and some donations were made in her name and some in his. And then, unfortunately, this man's wife died. The man let your organization know that his wife was deceased, and a development person at your organization assessed the woman's record and selected his wife's status as inactive, deceased from the drop-down list. And the drop-down list ensured that the person who was making that data change could only select from a range of values. Therefore, it was impossible for the data to be invalid. And in the donor database, that information also accurately reflected the real-world situation. However, because of poor data integration between the donor database and the mailing list, the wife was never taken off the organization's mailing list. And in that separate data set, she continued to have a status of active. Therefore, even though the husband notified the organization several times that his wife was deceased, the organization continued to send mailings to her. The person doing that data entry into the donor database reported the problem to a manager, but it was not red flagged as a potential persistent data quality issue. So as it turned out, ultimately, and this is something that happened in real life, the problem took only $1,000 to resolve. But by the time the organization recognized and reacted to the data quality problem resulting in the inaccuracy in one part of the data set, the man was emotionally upset and had lost confidence in the competency of the organization. And I don't know if you have similar experiences in your own life as being on the receiving end of constituent email or physical mailings, and you receive something from an organization that indicates that not all of their systems understand your relationship with them as in an accurate way. Like for example, you get offered to donate to something that you've already donated to, or you receive a message about being a member of a donor program or other constituent program that you're not actually a member of. or inviting you to join something that you've already joined. So this fellow reasonably got upset and, as I said, lost confidence in the competency of the organization. So he canceled that $10,000 pledge and began giving the same amount to another organization. So for lack of an $1,000 data quality decision being made proactively, the organization lost $10,000. Now you might say, okay, well, $10,000 maybe in the grand scheme of things for an organization that raises, say, $10 million a year, that's not such a huge deal. But in actual fact, what happened is the organization lost $200,000 in potential revenue. That was what they expected to get from this donor based on their overall statistics during his lifetime. So that's a delay in making an $1,000 fixed decision to correct an accuracy problem. Remember, in both systems, the status for the wife's constituent record was accurate, but in one system it was valid, and in another system it was invalid. So for lack of that $1,000 decision being made proactively, it cost $200,000 effectively. So that's something that we all want to avoid, right? I wish these kinds of stories were more uncommon than they are, but this is actually a fairly common scenario. And it's really interesting because organizations don't often do the kind of follow-up that they should do with lapsed donors or donors in these kinds of situations to find out what the challenge really was. And oftentimes that kind of sort of due diligence or investigatory work can help identify data problems that you might not otherwise have spotted, because of as I said, the challenges in actually physically comparing the data's accuracy to the real world thing that it describes. So now moving on to consistency. And this is probably one of the hardest things for organizations of all stripes to get right. It's just very challenging. So data consistency is ensured by the methodology applied for data collection, and that methodology remaining consistent over time. And this is measured by the degree of similarity or absence of variety within the data. And we can measure consistency of similar data over time by looking for trends and differences from the trends. And consistency is what allows for the authentic analysis or interpretation of data over time and across space. And in order to ensure that this is possible, the data collection process must be well documented and standardized to the fullest extent possible. So, for example, considering every program within a vacuum can be deadly from the standpoint of organizational indicators, that aggregated will provide performance data to both the organization and its key funders, as well as potentially to industry analysts and influencers. If the consistent collection rules for organization indicators are not applied across all of the programs, then the organization's performance may be off in ways that are difficult to spot just by looking at the data, absent the ability to evaluate the record of differing data collection methodologies and then make appropriate corrections in the interpretation. So this is no more than to say that if the methodology that you use for collecting and managing data over time changes, but no record of that change is made, it becomes increasingly difficult to do historic trend analysis based on that. And so I'll now provide an example to help this really sink in. So in this case story, I'm going to talk about consistency and youth services. And consistency will frequently be a problem when critical business definitions change over time. But that fact of that change is not recorded as a separate data point that can be applied to help interpret the data trends. So, for example, an organization's definition of at risk youth might change over the course of a prolonged period of time, and data might be collected relative to that definition. This means that means when that occurs that there's a lack of consistency within the data collection and then hence within the data itself. The fact of the definition changing is a critical piece of the data necessary to interpret the lack of consistency within it and make adjustments accordingly when doing the analysis. Otherwise, it might seem as if the real world object, in this case, the number of at risk youth, had changed, but in actual fact, what changed is how the organization defines at risk. Um, so let's just say that at risk was related to conditions in their local environment, in their living environment, in their school environment, etc. And that definition of what aspects of that should be taken into of the environment should be taken into consideration changed. Even that might influence the number of people, youth, considered at risk. And you could compound that by introducing another challenge of consistency, which is what if the definition of youth changes, say over a 10-year time span, as well as at risk? Um, so you could really see that if you don't maintain a log or a record of those business definitions changing over time, you wouldn't necessarily know, looking back at the historic analysis of the data, that say in 2010 the definition of at risk changed. It changed again slightly in 2012. It changed in 2018. Or that, say, in 2013, the definition of youth expanded from uh, 13 to 18 to 12 to 18 in age. So these are cases where consistency will kill you, man. And all of these, many organizations that I've worked with do actually a fairly good job of maintaining good completeness and validity and accuracy, or at least they're able to remediate problems in those areas after the fact. Sometimes not, obviously, but sometimes, yes, able to do that. However, they might not have been in the habit of documenting when business definitions or processes change, and that then becomes their Achilles heel when trying to represent an authentic interpretation of their organization's performance over a period of time. Now I'm going to talk about timeliness and what that is. So, timeliness refers to both the regularity of the data collection and the availability of that data to decision makers, which are two distinct but related things. But the overall goal is to decrease the time between when the real world object changes and when that change becomes known by all relevant parties. So relevant parties could be program staff, organizational strategists, funders, and other different information consumers that need to make good decisions based on that information. So there are some different points of importance to consider regarding timeliness. And the first is if the data has a high degree of volatility, there is an increased risk that the data will not meet standards for timeliness, meaning that by the time the information becomes known in decision-making quarters, the real world object has changed. And volatility is the degree to which data is likely to change over time. So an example of low volatility data historically is considered to be gender. But an example of high volatility data is salary. And of course, all of these things are relative. Yes, gender can change, but overall, it is not considered to be a high volatility data point. At least not as far as I'm aware. But data that has high volatility will need to be checked more frequently to ensure it remains timely. So yes, you have to check both, obviously, but there are different degrees of volatility within those designations. Data fails to be timely also if there is a lack between when a fact becomes known and when it becomes available for use. So, for example, if a program staffer in the field becomes aware of a change to a real world object that is important to project outcomes or program outcomes, but fails to communicate it to program decision makers in a timely manner, perhaps because the change occurred between regular reporting intervals, that might create a problem. So this highlights the need for all staff to follow both the letter and the spirit of the law when collecting and transmitting data. And then data also fails to be timely when there is a lag between when the data is updated at the source and when it becomes available to decision makers at other ends of the information chain. So for example, if data is contained in a spreadsheet at the program office, but does not get transmitted to HQ, then you have problems with timeliness. So timeliness is sort of multifaceted, but again, it really again is about making sure that you decrease the time between when the real world object that the data describes changes and when that change becomes known by everybody that's making decisions. And so let me talk about that in terms of another case story. So this is a picture of the devastation that occurred on the New Jersey coastline a number of years ago during Hurricane Sandy. And timeliness was of critical importance for this disaster response situation, as it is in all disaster response scenarios. The timeliness of accurate data, such as weather forecasting, resource availability, and positioning, helps governments and relief organizations to successfully deliver services to assist those in urgent need because of a natural disaster such as this. Or in another example, some sort of mass human rights violation or civil strife in the events leading up to, during, and following a large scale event like Hurricane Sandy or some sort of civil conflict. The timeliness of data can make a huge difference to providing timely relief. And you will find in these particular kinds of situations that the efficiency with which the organizations involved exchange information and the timeliness of that data being able to be combined and interpreted for different actions has a lot to do with how organizations and agencies fare in the effectiveness of their activities and help, hence in the eyes of public perception in the assessment that takes place following the aftermath of such an incident. Obviously, this has been very relevant to all of us in recent months in relationship to the national discourse about the quality of data associated with the pandemic, both the data that's known about the disease itself, as well as the data about effective remediation measures in regards to the disease on a number of different fronts, both public policy and in terms of applying vaccines, developing and applying vaccines and so forth. And we've all been treated on an almost daily basis to opinions and evaluation of whether or not that data was being exchanged and interpreted and used to inform decisions in timely ways. Yeah, as well as a myriad of other things. So that is obviously the most present example for us globally that impacts everyone that's related to data quality in general, but specifically to this aspect of data quality, which is timeliness. And I'm sure you're also aware that of the public perception aspect of that as well. So last, I'm going to talk about data integrity. Data integrity is how all of the different parts fit together how the pieces make one whole thing. So if you have a large database, data warehouse, data mart, or even a file share with multiple Excel files containing records from a range of systems, people who are using that data have an expectation that they'll be able to connect it. They expect the data to be integrated. This is one of the things that is more taken for granted in terms of an expectation today than it was, say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. The integrity of the data is one of the first things that people will question when they cannot use the data in ways that they expect. So it is important to have a plan for how you are joining data from different data sets or tables and how well the joined data fits together. And so when you have multiple information systems and the data within them relates to each other, you need to create a way to make sure that the integrity of that data is present when it is related for the purpose of gaining insight and making decisions. Um, and I just want to note here that the term integrity, when we're relating the data, is used different ways in different environments. So many people, when they talk about data integrity, they're thinking about it as being synonymous with data quality broadly. Or they think about data integrity, they think about whether the data has become corrupted in some way or the database has become corrupted. In the sense that we're talking about it today, we're talking about integrity in terms of almost integratability, how the different parts fit together to make one integral whole. So, at a very high level, measures of integrity are measures between different tables in the database, how you join data from different data sets and how well it fits together. It's basically, as I said, your ability to relate the data cohesively. And so again, I'll use a case story as a example of integrity. So integrity matters in the healthcare industry. Again, we've all been thinking about this a lot lately. When you need to be able to bring together data related to diseases from a wide variety of sources. So viewing all of the medical records from a particular hospital is relatively easy by comparison to collecting and analyzing disease related data from a variety of different hospital systems or other similar institutions. Without being able to easily integrate the various data sets, it is very time consuming to be able to analyze the data, perhaps even to perform predictive analysis that will help to control the spread of a particular disease. So, in this case, as in many cases, including the last one around disaster relief, there is where there's a high degree of criticality associated with making a timely response. The ease in which the different parts of the data fit together is really important. Um, you'll know probably from your own experience as a medical services consumer that there's been a lot of work done to standardize the collection of healthcare data within the United States or globally, particularly over the past decade or maybe 15 years or so. But we all know there's still a long way to go in terms of data record integrity and being able to take your own records, sort of the portability, say, and then integrate them with another record set in another location. So it's a continual challenge and a continual battle. And one of the reasons why that work is being done is to ensure there is integrity across multiple different systems, across multiple different means of collecting data, and that eases the ways in which people can use that data to increase public health and also mitigate risk. But as you know, um, recently, because of the pandemic, there are still, with the pandemic, there has emerged many challenges to the authentic interpretation of data based on the ability of different record sets and different systems in different parts of the country and the world to produce data sets that integrate well with each other and can do so rapidly to fund analysis. So we're going to do a little bit of a recap here because I discovered a lot of information in a short period of time. Um, here are the aspects of data quality that we've covered today. So first, completeness, the breadth and depth of the data, and we considered that through the lens of gender equality services. Validity and accuracy, as considered through the lens of a donor retention case story. Consistency, as considered through the lens of youth services. Timeliness, as considered through the lens of disaster response. And integrity, as considered through the lens of healthcare. There are many different examples that I could share for each one of these different dimensions of data quality. And I'm sure for those of you who have been in the trenches on data quality within nonprofit or social good organizations, or in systems administration, which in many ways is also data management. You have a lot of your own stories to share about successes and failures and data quality. Hopefully someday in the not too distant future, we'll be able to meet in person at a conference and have some drinks and swap stories about all of these different kinds of things. So now I'm going to talk about a couple of sort of pragmatic recommendations for introducing or carrying forward data quality conversations at your own organizations. So first, there's no such thing as perfect data quality, much to my chagrin and the chagrin of many, particularly in the data analysis space. For data to be perfect, it would always have to be precisely representative of the real world object. And we know that this is extremely difficult, if not impossible. The objects that we work with in the course of performing our work are often complex. And as I said before, particularly with people or environments or anything, there's rarely such a thing as a completely static object that's being described. So there's an inherent challenge in describing the real world object and keeping that description accurate. So it's just important to remember that. And also, as I said before, data is meaningless absent the context of relationships. Your relationship to that real world object and the relative importance of that relationship compared to other relationships that you have dictates your data quality priorities. And this is what drives you to ask the critical questions: how complete does my data need to be? How accurate does it need to be? Et cetera, because we all have a finite number of resources that can be committed to data quality. And it's difficult to prioritize those resources. So oftentimes with organizations, they'll say, well, how should we prioritize what data we focus on? One of the things that I ask them, just as a sort of thought-provoking question, is it better to have a small amount of high-quality data or a large amount of low-quality data? And just let them wrestle with that a little bit. But ultimately, the answer is, what are my obligations towards the thing that I am in a relationship with? And what do those obligations require me to track in the form of data in order to maintain the sort of nature of the relationship? And then the question is, what additional data might we want or prefer to capture that satisfies the need for additional exploration? Whether that's entrepreneurism and looking for additional opportunities to do more within that relationship or to benefit the people or things on the receiving end of that relationship. So those are the kinds of questions that you need to ask in terms of trying to prioritize what parts of your data set should receive the highest priority from a data quality standpoint. Relative importance of the relationship to the organization, the obligations within those relationships, even if they're just self-imposed obligations based on your mission. And then secondarily, what additional data might you want to collect in order to be able to inform potential future ventures, or introduce maybe additional program/mission oriented benefit. And again, I just want to emphasize that the specific approach to data quality for each organization relies on the clarity and strength in organizational strategy, both at a high level and as it's extended through programs and projects. Ultimately, the strategy should tell you the relationships that are most critical to success, and the value placed on each relationship. And then you can, again, prioritize your resources according to that value. And in order to do that effectively, this often requires some degree of transformation at an organizational level before improvements to processes or data or technology can be effectively leveraged. And again, it all comes back to leadership-driven transformation. If your organization doesn't have a strong strategic plan, it doesn't say how success against that plan will be measured, and it doesn't provide the entire organization with that kind of clear guidance, it becomes very difficult to sustain good data quality efforts over a prolonged period of time. And finally, organizations of any size and complexity that make data quality a cultural endeavor typically have good data quality relative to their need for such, while organizations that do not make it a cultural endeavor will generally have poor data quality. It's just that simple. So do it well if you're going to do it. If you're going to do data quality well, do it thoroughly, and make sure to celebrate successes. For all the talk about data quality in the nonprofit space or the broader social sector, having truly high quality data is relatively rare. And the ability to use that data to inform meaningful action is even rarer. So whenever your organization makes any steps forward in terms of data quality, even if it doesn't get you all the way to where you think you need to be, take some time to celebrate that success and help people to feel like there are milestones that can be reached that will be meaningful, that fall somewhere short of that total perfection standard, or even the standards of reasonable success that are established based on your organization's strategic priorities. So I just wanted to provide my contact information, as I did in the Slack channel as well, to let you know that, I'm happy to have additional follow-up conversations with anybody after this. If you have anything that occurs to you over the coming days or weeks that you'd like to discuss, an idea to kick around, perhaps an initiative that you're trying to get going in your own organization in regards to data quality, or just questions about how to approach particular situations, I'm happy to discuss. There's no obligation. This is just part of engaging within the community. Obviously I work for a consulting firm, and there may be some things that we can do for you down the road, but this is primarily just about me being available to you within this context. So you see the options that are available on screen here. Best way to get a hold of me is via email. So we've got plenty of time left at the end of this session for Q&A. So if you have any questions or comments, as I said, feel free to put them into the Slack channel. I'm happy to hang out and answer as many questions as you have. They could be questions about the content of the presentation, or again, this might be an opportunity to ask specific questions about your own needs. If you don't want me to mention the name of your organization when you out loud, let me know. I see somebody's typing something in here. And if you don't have any questions or don't want to stick around for the Q&A, feel free to drop off as well. That's totally fine. One of the questions that I get most commonly is how to make data quality problems really present to stakeholders that need to be convinced of the challenge in order to be able to create and apply a solution. Storytelling is a great way to do that, as I hope I've been able to exhibit during today's presentation. But we've also found that it is very helpful to do some visualization of the data. It's just there's just some ways in which you can say, well, we don't have 23% of our constituent records without a value in X field. But for some reason, just that statement would not resonate with somebody as well as just a simple pie chart that shows that exact same statistic. Now, obviously, that's an indicator of that's a very easy, simple visual to produce, and there are a lot of other ways that you can visualize data. But sometimes even just really simple things like that is very helpful. So we have a question here from Georgina. I'm experiencing issues with manual data entry from an overworked team. How do I try to help them understand the importance of clean entry? That's a great question. So ultimately, I think that clean data entry, the value of that needs to be connected pretty clearly to what having clean data enables your team or your organization to be able to do better accordingly. So one of the most significant disincentives to maintaining high quality data within an organization is when the individuals that are engaged in managing the data at all levels, whether it's entry or making edits or maintaining data cleanliness over time, is if the organization is not clearly and consistently running reports on that data and using it to inform decisions that lead to better outcomes. So, if somebody tasks you with the goal of doing data entry and it was being done in addition to numerous other things that you were doing, and you had no insight into how that data was being used and what difference it really made, that would be a problem. So, without knowing more about your specific situation, that's something that I would recommend, just making that clear. And if you don't have the ability to do that for whatever reason, then the organization might have some other challenges that it needs to address. So, yep, I'm glad that was helpful. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Trying to think of some other questions that I will commonly receive when presenting on this topic. I think that ultimately the biggest challenges in data quality do often come back to leadership. And that's challenging because for many organizations, it's most difficult to address the topic at that level. And that's why I say that sometimes in order for data quality improvements to be made, there needs to be a profound cultural change, and that starts at the leadership level. And sometimes in organizations, we've had to actually see a leadership change, maybe in a president or ED role, or in a COO role, or in a CFO role, or some other senior executive level within the organization, before that change could be realized more broadly throughout the different levels of the organization. We had one client that we worked for over a prolonged period of time, and we were able to make some minor gains in terms of data quality, but ultimately, whenever there were gaps in the data, the reports would just be taken by the different programmatic teams, and they would sort of fill in the missing gaps with anecdata based on their experience. And there was no telling how accurate the data actually was or wasn't based on that. And this was information that was going into board reports and to funders and to be able to measure success internally. Ultimately, what happened is when they had turned over at the COO position, they were able to start writing in that ship. And this maybe addresses your question a little bit, Georgina, as well. But one of the things that that COO did that's actually very infrequently done at nonprofit organizations is they made effective data management a part of the job description for employees. And against which would comprise a part of their employee performance evaluation that was done, I think, annually. And that was the first time that sort of timeliness and quality of data input and management over time was made a part of the actual job description and performance management for those individuals. It is difficult to actually implement something like that with clarity. Um, and you want to do it with clarity if it's something that people's performances, individual performance and team performance are going to be evaluated against. But it can be extremely beneficial culturally for the organization to do something like that. And that is also a way of very practically saying to the entire organization, you know, we're serious about this. This is of high importance. And that made a profound change in that particular organization, and I imagine would at other organizations that were able to pull it off effectively. Another question that I often get is what qualities to look for when hiring a data manager or a system administrator that is charged with some data quality management. I have a whole separate presentation about that called "A Good Data Manager is Hard to Find," and you can actually find that, I think, on the Data Analysts for Social Good website from a couple years back, but it's also available on my firm's website. And we actually have a whole section of our website titled Learning on the main navigation that has all of the recordings from our past webinars, of which that is one. They're available in YouTube video format. Many of them, particularly over the last couple of years, are available in MP3 format. And because they don't rely extensively on visuals, you can download the MP3 files and listen to them, maybe not on a commute these days, but when you're out riding your bike or taking a walk or whatever. And that's a good way to learn. And also we have some templates and white papers there that are helpful as well. And then our blog, which is in a separate section, has a number of different articles around data quality and system selections and implementations and what good leadership and for technology projects inside of organizations looks like, all of those things. So received another question about, would love to get some pointers on how to best handle data cleanup and to find errors in data entry. Well, that's a broad question. So as I said, one of the ways to find errors in data entry is to visualize the data. It kind of helps outliers to stand out a little bit more. That can be helpful. Establishing clearer sort of, as I was said earlier, under the validity, clearer domains of values against which data should be compared to identify validity errors. Spot checking data for accuracy, as I said, like taking some constituent records, say at random, and comparing them to information that is stored elsewhere about that individual, or maybe interviewing the individual to make sure that the data that you have for that individual is still accurate. You can also so there are a variety of different ways that you can go about assessing whether the data you have is of good quality. In terms of organizing handling data cleanup. I mean, there are a variety of different tools for that. So for example, you could do address validation to see if your addresses are current for locations or constituent records. You could use deduping tools to eliminate duplicates or identify probable duplicates. You can, once you identify specific data errors based on spot checking, you could go do a more in-depth, as I said, comparison for accuracy and make that into an internal structured initiative. Um, there are a variety of different ways to organize data cleanup. I think within organizations, the most common point at which data cleanup is done is when an organization is trying to migrate from one system to another or preparing to, and they don't want to carry their flotsam and jetsam forward from the waters of their data lake, so to speak, into the new system. So that's a point at which cleanup becomes a high priority. It's true when moving between one CRM and another, sometimes between one program management system and another, sometimes even just when moving the contents of a network file share into SharePoint or Microsoft Teams for the first time. Sometimes a new system selection and implementation effort can be a catalyst for helping to provide some impetus and structure for a data cleanup project. Another way is if you have a system that is a vendor provided and supported system that's very specific functional area of an organization, like say human services case management as an example. The vendor that provides that tool may have some insights to offer you in terms of how to best measure and perform measure data quality and perform data cleanup tasks for that particular system, or for the particular functional area or expertise that is supported by that system. Sometimes less easy to do less easy to get that kind of insight when it comes to, say, your data is stored in a set of Excel tables that you custom developed or in an Access or SQL database. So there's a lot of different things to consider when thinking about both identifying data quality issues and how to handle the data cleanup. I will say also that the accuracy issues are generally easiest to catch at point of entry. If you have some sort of QA process where every X number of records are checked by another person, or have another set of eyes on them, or as I said, if you increase the system embedded validity rules around data entry, those can all be helpful. Well, I think we're at time or close to it, and that is all of the questions that I've received. So thank you again so much for engaging in this session today, and thanks for your questions. I hope that this was valuable for you. And again, if you have any follow-ups that you'd like to send my way, my email address is in the channel chat. And whether that's in a couple of days or next week or in a couple of months, something comes across your desk that you'd like some feedback on, feel free to reach out to me. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again. Bye.